I want to welcome you to another episode of the Twins Talk It Up podcast. My twin brother and I are thrilled. We have an incredible guest joining us today. I want to say welcome to Chris Jones. Chris is the author of The Art and Business of Writing, a practical guide to writing life, a book targeted at helping new and seasoned authors hone their writing skills, balance their work life, and then also learn how to become more effective, clearer writers. He also helps them to promote their books, sell their books, and understand different ideas that should be tied into their book in terms of their voice, their tone, and literally every aspect from beginning to end. This is Chris. Chris is also a three-time Virginia Press Association award-winning journalist. He's a graphic designer, an editor, a content writer, and a speaker. Chris is also the creator and host of a podcast by the same name of his book, the one that we mentioned earlier, The Art and Business of Writing, where he interviews authors, writers, creative professionals who influence the writing world. Chris, welcome to the Twins Talk It Up program. How are you?
Hey, Dave, I'm great. Good to be here with you and Dan today. How are you guys?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Now, from time to time, you'll hear David or myself tell you a question, or ask you a question, just for our audience to understand who we are. I'll say this is Danny, or David will say this is David, so that people don't get confused. And as I always tell people, if you don't know who's speaking, just listen to see who's more eloquent, and then you know that's Danny. Tell us a little bit more about how you really got into this journey of becoming a writer and then also working with other people.
Great. So I'll give you kind of the Cliff Notes version. So I started off as a graphic designer. I graduated with my degree in design from the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. Started off working in a college marketing situation. Then moved back to Virginia, left Pittsburgh, moved back to Virginia, worked for a newspaper in the production department. So I was doing art, paste up, that sort of thing. An opening happened for a sports writer, and they couldn't fill it. It was like 3 or 4 weeks in the newspaper. They couldn't fill it. So I just asked for the opportunity. Because it was a different shift. I worked day shift as a designer, the night shift job was sports writing. They gave me an opportunity. I wrote my first story, came in Monday morning. The publisher had a note on my desk. He wanted to meet with me. I was like, oh man, I must have bombed out bad. So anyway, so I go to see the publisher and he's like, hey, look, I'm taking you out of graphic design. I'm putting you into sports full time. What do you think? He's like, your story was fantastic and that's what we needed. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I did sports writing for a number of years, and kind of for a good stretch of 7 or 8 years, I toggled back and forth between writing and design. I couldn't decide which one I liked more. And then, my wife, she was my girlfriend at the time. She's like, hey, you talk about writing all the time. You talk about how much you love it. Why don't you just give it a chance again? So I set an intention. I opened up a journal. I said, okay, I'm going to write for 100 days about what it's going to be like to become a writer again. So I just wrote in the journal every day for 100 days about becoming a writer again, what that was going to look like, how I was going to do it. And about 75 days into that journey, the idea for a blog came up. And so I started it. I was like, okay, I'm going to run with this. So I just went to GoDaddy, put myself up a blog on WordPress, started blogging about people in town, different business owners. And then I got noticed by a parenting magazine. They offered me an opportunity to be their editor, and then off I went. And then didn't look back after that. Just took the editing job, and since then I've been in the writing space, and that's been since 2012.
Chris, I appreciate you sharing that. And we're going to get into your world of writing and what you do professionally as a writing coach, as a speaker. We'll talk about all those things in a moment. But let me ask you this. You're also a podcaster.
I am, yeah.
Put your podcast out. So tell us about your podcast and how did your podcast lead to you writing your book?
It was the other way around, actually.
Oh, okay.
The podcast came, you're right. It was the book, and then the podcast came right after the book. So what led into the podcast was the fact that I wanted to be able to supplement the book with another teaching tool. Because I felt like the book was a great visual teaching tool, but I also wanted to be able to teach from a different platform. And so podcasting was coming around the bend as like the next up and coming platform that people were getting into, and that was like 2016, 2017. And so I started to play around and dabble with it, and I was kind of being mentored by another friend, Jason, and he's like, hey man, what's up with your podcast? You've been talking about it for 3 months. Why isn't it online yet? I'm like, I don't know, just trying to figure it out. He said, dude, progress over perfection, just get it out. All right, fine. So I was like, all right, off we go. So I just started recording, and he's like, hey man, it doesn't matter if it's great at first. He said, as long as the information is good, that's all that people care about is getting good information. And so I just started to develop a podcast around the idea of writing because I felt like writers just needed something tangible in their ear. I felt like, just those weekly lessons about, and not just writing, because I know there's a lot of great writing specific podcasts, but really the sides that I was really good with was the marketing side of writing and just really bringing those sorts of creative professionals to writers so that writers would know more about that side.
That's pretty interesting. That you kind of went with the flow with it all. As you're doing your podcasts, tell us who's the most unique or weird guest that you've ever had on your podcast. Now you can say unique, but just curious, who's the most unique person you've had on your podcast?
So the most unique person I would probably say is a girl named Hannah Carmike. Mm-hmm. She had this really cool story because she wanted to be, she was writing a book, she was writing fiction books, and she wanted to be discovered by a publisher. And so she tweeted, she did enter some sort of Twitter contest online, and a publisher picked her book up based on a funny tweet she did.
Wow.
So to me, that was like the coolest thing because we get all hyper focused on being perfect and writing this perfect like pitch letter and having our synopsis done and having a great manuscript, and hers was just a tweet. So 140 character tweet, and she got picked up by a publisher based on that. So to me, that was like the coolest, most unique story of any of my podcast guests.
Well, this is Daniel, by the way. I love how you said that it was a tweet, and when you're limited on the number of characters that you're allowed to tweet. So this individual had to become very creative on what the message was, and that tells you the mindset that she had. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was.
So Chris, you help authors, you help writers become very successful in their craft, more successful with their business as well. Can you talk about the difference between working with writers and then working with individuals who are professionals or leaders in a different field?
Yeah, so working with business professionals is a little different because business professionals tend to already have a story built in. So you basically, what a business professional is doing is you're gleaning off of your years of experience and taking all those years of experience and putting them in a bound book. So for the most part, if you're like, say you're a coach of some sort, you're gonna take all of your coaching materials, your program, all the experience you have, and you're gonna put that into a book. And typically, with that sort of scenario with a coach, your coaching program becomes the entire book. Wow. You're basically giving people your coaching program in the form of a book, hoping that they'll use the book. You're not looking to become rich off the book. You're using the book as a way to get them to buy into the coaching program. So that's the difference in working with corporate or business professionals. Is we're trying to train them to use their books as an additional platform to either get people to buy into programs they're into, supplement programs, like be kind of like the low cost version of the high ticket item, or to use it as a platform to build a speaking career out of. So, okay, if you want to become a speaker, then you write a book and use the book as a platform, because the book gives you a decided advantage over someone who just sends a form letter or an email asking for a speaking opportunity. You put a book in a meeting planner's hand, it's a whole different world. Mm-hmm. So that's how it works on that side. As far as working with a general author, that work is a little more intensive because you're helping them pull stories out of them, and they typically want to hold stories inside. And so so I spend a lot of time interviewing them when I coach them. So we're going through an outline, we're building a synopsis together, but I'm spending a lot more time being a journalist in a sense where I'm interviewing them and saying, okay, tell me more about this story, tell me more about this, tell me more about that. Let's get it all on paper. Don't hold back anything, just put all the details down, because it's always better to have a lot more than a lot less. And we can kind of whittle down what's going to be the story, what the chapters are going to look like, who the audience is. Because typically you go in with one mindset as an author, and then you discover as you put everything on paper that you're talking to somebody completely different. Mm. And so you find a different audience, but you didn't know that was the audience until you actually articulated it on paper.
So it sounds like there is a little more depth into how you work with an author or someone who's a seasoned writer, because you're trying to get them to look at themselves a little differently and pulling out of them all that incredible knowledge and experience that they have and putting it on paper. But when it comes to professional leaders, executives, business owners, you're literally saying, hey, you already have a message. You already have a story. Let's put it in a book format. Let's get it out there. So here's the question, because you already led into this, Chris. Why should I write a book? If I am, let's say, CEO of a small company, mid-sized company, I've been a corporate executive for years. Why would it be an advantage for me to write a book? Let's say I don't necessarily think of myself as a public speaker or want to go on circuit. Why would it benefit a leader to write their own story?
If nothing else, it's authority.
Mm.
It gives you authority in your field. Like having a book shows that you can articulate your thoughts, because at the end it looks good to clients. When a client sees that you've written a book, it shows that, okay, there's a method to you. You can articulate your thoughts. You can put your thoughts on paper. You can put your ideas in a format that's different than anybody else. So having a book, it doesn't matter whether you, like you said, if you don't want to be a public speaker, if you just want to have books to put in your storefront, then you can do that. But yeah, it's a game changer for you, because, and it also for you, I think it gives you an opportunity to show yourself that you have credibility within your own eyes. Because I think a lot of times we discount ourselves, we discount what we know, or we get caught up, in our business so much being in it that we don't realize how much knowledge we have behind our business. So it can go that way.
Yeah, I love that, Chris. That's so inspiring to be able to look at it from that perspective. You have knowledge, you have experience, you have the ability to be able to convey that through your book or through writing books. Yep. And it's so important to realize that you can use that to show your credibility. You're not necessarily in it to make money. You're in it to really leverage who you are, what you've done, to maybe perhaps gain a larger share or increase your profitability. There are ways to do that as a professional. So you're helping professionals write the story that only they can tell through your support. So let's talk about how you support these professionals. I was looking at your website. I noticed you have on there, you have coaching, you have editing, you have ghostwriting. Tell us about what that looks like if you're meeting a CEO or a professional for the first time, and how you work them through that process of choosing either ghostwriting the book for them, or just having them having you edit what they've already done, or you coach them through the process. So of those three avenues, which one do most leaders or business owners come to you for?
Most come for me to be like an author collaborator. And so what that is essentially is that they're going to write the book, and I'm going to write the book alongside them. And so typically they'll come with an outline. They'll come with stuff that they've already written. Like they'll say, okay, I've got all these blogs that I've written in the past, and I think these might be good fodder for a book. Or I've got some of these ideas I've written down that could be good chapters in a book. And so what they'll do is they'll feed those to me. I'll look through that. I'll organize it and say, well, this works. This doesn't work. Let's expand on this. And so typically it's more of a, like I said, author collaborator, where I'm actually writing alongside them and helping them flesh out ideas with my own hand as well, and interviewing them to get that done. Or it's a situation of developmental editing, where they've got a lot of the material and I'm going through the material with them and saying, this is good, keep this. This is not so good, get rid of that. This is really good, but as a reader, I want you to talk more about this, that, and the other. And so helping them to really put the meat and put the weight behind topics and ideas. So that's the author collaborator. That's what people come to me for the most. I have done some ghostwriting, which is a lot of fun. It's labor intensive on my end and time consuming, because I've got to spend a lot of time with an author. So an author has to have a lot of time for that. And because what we do typically is we'll spend a lot of time on audio recording. So I'll call them up, we'll pick a day of the week or 2 days of the week, and we set aside an hour, and I'll interview you just like I'm interviewing you for like a magazine or whatever the publication is. And I'll interview and ask you very targeted and specific questions, so that I can take those recordings, transcribe them, and then write them into your book. So that's how the ghostwriting works. And that works for people who are too busy to even do anything about their writing. So, and that typically starts with me putting together an outline for you, having you look at that and say, okay, I like this. Here's the build out for the book. And we build the entire synopsis together. And then I just start asking you questions from chapter to chapter. And then the editing part works, where if someone has already written a book, they say, okay, I've got this book written, I just want you to clean it up for me. And I've worked in those situations where people just send me a book and say, I just want you to take a look at it, clean it up, make sure there's no errors, make sure that I didn't miss anything, make sure that the ideas are cohesive throughout the entire book. And I've worked in that fashion as well.
This is Danny, by the way. I find this very intriguing that you come in at an angle where it doesn't matter where this individual's at, you can help them. Either they call you, you document, or they're speaking with you, or they already have a process already written out. So you have ways to help people where they're at. One of the things I want to ask you is, how do you help these individuals develop their story? Because anytime I watch a movie, I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's hard to take a really big novel or big book and condense it to a movie. However, if you can talk about the story, you can talk about that plot, make a hero, make a villain, people tend to follow that. It doesn't matter what the movie is. They always have to find somebody they can identify with or somebody they can feel special about it. And almost every movie or every good book, it talks about how I came from nothing, or how I was beat up by society, or how I was like the runt of the litter growing up, and all of a sudden I'm like the big CEO, I'm the big kahuna now. How do you help these individuals develop that story that will capture audience's attention, that will allow the audience to want to find favor with this hero or this individual? How do you put that story and that plot together so that people like myself and David, we want to continue to keep reading?
It's funny you should mention movies, because I use movies all the time as a prime example for the author. So I tell them that they have to learn how to write a log line. And if you're familiar with movies, I tell them, say, look, just hop on to Netflix and just read all the log lines on Netflix. And I said, essentially what you want to do is you want to create a log line for your book. Your entire book needs to be an elevator pitch. So if you go into a barbecue and you're hanging out with your friends and neighbors and say, oh, what's your book going to be about? You got to be able to say that in 8 to 10 words. And so that's the first thing we do. We really whittle that down. So, okay, well, what's the heart and soul of your book? So for mine was like, talking about, so when I did the art and business of writing, it was, for new writers who want to write better and seasoned writers who want to grow, like that sort of thing. So I really I kept it really just, okay, if you're new, it's perfect for you because you're gonna learn things you've never learned before. If you're seasoned, then the marketing side's gonna teach you things you didn't know before. And that's really the premises. And that's what I always pitch to people. Hey, if you're a new writer, this book teaches you how to write and how to market. If you're a seasoned writer, this book will help your marketing game go next level. So I just tell people, hey, write the log line. So, look at Netflix, create a log line for your book, and then run with it. Then we build around the log line.
Chris, that's awesome. This is David. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to be able to have you share how you work with professionals like myself and my twin. Dan and I have been in the process of writing a couple books ourselves, and I can't tell you how much we're learning about ourselves. So let me ask this question, Chris. What do the leaders you support, either you're writing alongside them, you're ghostwriting for them, you're editing for them, what do they learn about themselves through the journey of working with you?
They learn they can do it. They learn they can communicate. That's the biggest thing, is that they learn that they can communicate with an audience and they can stick to message from beginning to end. Because I think a lot of times they come and they're really anxious about, well, I don't have an idea for a whole book, or I've got all these different ideas from here, from A to Z, from here to here. So they learn that they can communicate one solid message from cover to cover. And I think that's the biggest thing to learn about themselves, is being able to stay on brand.
So let me ask this. This is David again, Chris, and it's encouraging to be able to see what they discover about themselves, that they are incredible, they are talented, they have so much they can offer and give, which I really believe is the power behind books and the words, is you could give of yourself to an audience that you couldn't give maybe, or you couldn't touch if they didn't have the book in front of them, right? So they learn this about themselves. They learn this process of working with you. What do you enjoy most about working with these leaders? What do you get out of it other than the fact you brought on a new client? What do you get in terms of your fulfillment and enjoyment with working with professionals like that?
I think seeing that light bulb go off is the biggest thing for me. Seeing, like, once they get it, like once they have that synopsis, it's like, wow, like I've got the blueprint down. I can actually write this. So once they get that confidence that they can put the book together, then I feel like my job is good as gold at that point. Because when they first come, they're like I said, they're all over the place. They're not sure how it's going to get done, what it's going to look like, who they're talking to, or sometimes they think they're talking to one audience and then they learn that no, you're not talking to that audience, you're talking to this audience now, and so just they learn that, and it's like, you get it now, you understand. So for me, that's the satisfaction, is just when that light bulb goes off and they realize, I can communicate with other people, I can get this done. This isn't so bad, because the book is very intimidating. It's an intimidating process. For most people, just like, with public speaking, writing is a very intimidating thing because it's very personal. You're sharing your thoughts and ideas, you're being vulnerable, you're putting yourself on paper and you're putting yourself public. Whereas, then you're in a position where, what if someone doesn't agree with me? Or what if they troll me? What if they don't like what I have to say? So you're being very vulnerable. So when they can get over those feelings and say, look, all you have to do is reach one person with your book. Reach two people with your book. If you can change one or two people with your philosophy, your thoughts, your ideas, then you've won. You've done it.
This is Danny, by the way. I'm very encouraged to hear that you are letting individuals know that your story or what you're saying in your book, if it impacts one person or two people, it's worth it. I think sometimes we have this thing where Dave talked about in one of his episodes called imposter syndrome, where people are worried about what other people are going to think about them. Are they being authentic? Are they being fake? And I think at the end of the day, they have to realize that they have a message, and that message is who they are. Whether certain people like it or certain people don't, it's their message. And there are going to be people out there that are going to be impacted by that message. So as you're working with these, I'm going to call them leaders, because it takes a lot of guts, as you stated earlier, to put yourself out there when you're writing a book. And whether it's through editing the book, being a ghostwriter, helping to articulate, tell the story, or helping other people to see how they run things or do processes as a business leader, that all takes guts, and it's not easy to do. So as you're working with these individuals along the process from beginning to end, are you finding yourself at times having to continue to encourage them, continue to motivate them, to continue to say, to push them and say, look, we're getting there. You can keep going. It's kind of like that marathon runner. You're running a marathon and you listen to that theme music, like, look, it's mile 20. I'm hit the wall. You got to put on that song, that Eye of the Tiger, whatever it is. Do you find yourself in the process while you're working with these leaders to say, look, we're getting there. We can't stop, guys. Hey, don't stop. We got to keep going. We got to keep moving. Do you find yourself doing more coaching as you move along that process than in the beginning?
Oh, absolutely. I am. And it's always reminding them that what you're doing is of value. It's worth it. You're going to change somebody's life. And the thing is, with the criticism part, if you're a true leader and you're someone who is really dialed into what you do, criticism doesn't affect you. Criticism becomes fuel for your fires. You say, okay, well, if someone doesn't like this part of my book, well, why don't they like that part of my book? What is it about that didn't resonate with them? And then well, how do I improve that? Like I said, everyone's not going to like you, of course, and that's just perfectly fine. Everyone's not going to like your work, and that's perfectly fine. But again, learn to take that criticism. If you can learn to deflect all that and step on top of that, you'll be just fine. But yeah, just encouraging them, keep going. I do that a lot. I'll send text messages, I'll send emails, I'll drop a phone call. Hey, we're doing it. You're doing it, or we'll start working on other things while they're writing. I'll work on other things in the background and say, look, I've got your PR sheet. I'm going to send it over to you. Start working on that. Start fleshing that out. Put a couple podcast ideas on there for you. Or, hey, let's start talking about your cover next week. We'll not talk about writing. We'll talk about your cover next week. And so just keeping them engaged in some facet of the process, because writing can be tiring. It's a very tiring thing. And especially when we get in that messy middle, in those middle miles, like you talk about in a marathon, get those middle miles. I've run some long runs, and you get to that 3, 4, 5 mile area on a 10K. Like, oh man, I still got 3 more to go. So it's the same thing with writing. You get to those that messy middle, you start to lose confidence, and it's like, no, you're good. Don't go back and don't revise anything. Don't go back and read anything. Just keep writing forward, because it's always tempting to go back when you get stuck and go play with something in an earlier chapter or go mess around with some other part of your writing, and that will throw you off every time.
That's awesome. This is Danny, by the way. I want to ask another question, if it's okay. So by doing this for so long, I'm sure that you have a process and methodology for how books are put together. Typically, if I come to you and I say, look, I want to tell my story. I am a managed services provider. I do a lot of IT for small businesses, and I want to tell other people how to start your own IT company to help small businesses. So for example, just as a topic, for example, how long does it normally take from beginning to end to help that individual write that book?
I tell people typically 9 months to a year. Give yourself 9 months to a year, and a lot of that is because you've got your life. You've got work, you've got a family, you've got to find time to write. But give yourself a good 9 months to a year, because on the back end of that, and what I typically do is I work backwards with people. So I'll sit there and create a production schedule that starts with the end, and we work backwards to the front, so we can know how much time we need for cover design. We'll need a month for that. How much time we need for book conversions? We'll need 2 or 3 weeks for that. How much time do we need for editing? We'll need a month for that. Beta reading, 3 weeks for that. So we start working backwards, and then you can figure out a timeline of, okay, now how much time do you think you can write every week? How much time do you think you can devote to that? You're going to need about 40,000 words. So let's divide that up over the course of 9 months and see how many words per week you need to have done.
Okay.
So we start chopping it up and just deconstructing the entire process from back to front.
Wow, that makes
Chris,
sense.
this is David, and I appreciate you sharing that because most of our listeners may not understand the amount of time that's going to be needed to complete a book from beginning to end. I'm by nature not a very patient person, so I'm thinking to myself, Chris, I just met with you one time. Where's my book? And
Yes.
I know it takes more time, but I love how you said if we work backwards, you'll be able to get a picture of how much time you're going to need to allocate each week, each day to writing. And if you do that little thing every day, or if you commit to committing that goal every week, this book is going to be done before you realize it. And that's awesome. So I've got to ask you this. Earlier, I asked the question, what do these leaders learn about themselves? What do you learn about yourself, Chris, when you're working with these type of leaders, these confident, want to take over the world kind of people? But what do you learn about yourself as a coach, as a leader, as a business owner? What do you learn through the process?
I learn more about what I do because I think every client teaches me that I have to learn something new because every client's different. Every book is different. So whatever topic they're going into, I'm either having to learn how to market their book differently. I'm having to learn how to teach them how to write their book in a different manner that's going to be more cohesive and it's going to hit their audience in a different way. I'm having to learn formatting things. I had one guy who he does like Scrum, he does like Scrum planning for corporations. And so, he did a book where we did illustrations in the book, and I'd never done a book with illustrations. So I had to learn how to do illustrations in a book and figure out that whole process of, what's the price going to change, pricing for coloring versus black and white and formatting for book illustrations for that particular type of book, because he had a special size he wanted as well. So I had to learn, okay, well, let's get who can do this book size for him, and then learning how to index his book because he wanted a book with a big old index in the back. So I'll learn a lot about for me, it's more learning about the production and the process end in order to help people do their books. So I love that part too. I love learning new things. So each client teaches me more things about the book industry and process.
This is Danny. That's fantastic to hear that when you work with clients that you learn a lot. And that also tells me that you are flexible enough to be able to work with this individual instead of saying, look, I can only work with artists and that's it. You're learning more about their field, about who they are, what they are. And it actually, in my personal opinion, it encouraged me to want to write more. That, hey, I have a person who's helping me, but yet they're interested about what I'm doing, or they're interested in how I do it and why I do what I do. So that would actually encourage me to write more. Are there any tools or tips that you may have for people that are interested in writing? They're interested in building out their brand. They're interested in building out their business. And outside of that, how can they reach more people in social media? So any tips and tools you have for people that are interested in writing about their story or writing about their special skill set? And then what other tips do you have on the social media scene for them?
Yeah, I think you just do it. You sit down and you do it. Basically, if you have a story, if you have an idea for a book, just open up a Word document and just start writing everything out of your head. I tell people, if you got a nice weekend where no one's going to bother you, kind of lock yourself in a bedroom, put on some music that you enjoy that really gets you fired up, and go buy a bunch of Post-it notes and a Sharpie marker and just write down every thought about what you want to put into a book and just stick it on the wall. And by the time you're done, you got this big wall full of sticky notes, and then just start organizing things by chapter. Okay, well, if I'm writing a book about, let's say I'm writing a book about baseball. I'm a baseball coach. I want to teach, other coaches how to coach baseball. Then I start writing about all the different baseball coaches. Okay, this is the section I'm gonna write about umpires, and here's a section about batting techniques, and here's a section about base running. Here's a section about base position coaching, and this is the section about catching and positions. And so you start writing all that stuff and you start sticking every little bit of knowledge you have, no matter how minute it is, on the wall. Let everything disqualify itself. Never disqualify an idea. Let it disqualify itself. And then put everything on the wall, step back, take a look at it, and then start, like I said, just start organizing things by chapter, all things together, because then those things will end up becoming your chapters. So everything to do with baseball rules will go under a line of baseball rules posted. Everything about, offensive baseball stuff will go into the offensive baseball, defensive baseball stuff, pitching and catching, batting techniques, equipment. And then you got this entire thing, like, wow, I've got an entire outline right before my eyes in a weekend.
Good point. This is David, Chris. Dan was asking about social media. Are there any strategies you give your authors or the people you're working with about how to leverage their social media platforms?
Yeah, so one of the best things to do is with social media is just use quotes from your book. Create little, use Instagram and create little quotes from your book, little ideas, that here's something from chapter 1, here's something from chapter 2, and just push those out and put links to your book, and then have like the little links, in your. I use Instagram predominantly to have like little links in the bio for everything for your book or whatever. But yeah, post a lot of stuff from the book itself, so people get a feel for the book. You can share the book cover. I tell people as they're writing the book, keep talking about it, build your email list, let people know that a book is coming. You got this book that's coming, it's gonna be exciting. People on the list can get like, a percentage off if they stick around. What else on social media? Let's see. You can also, I just had something on top of my tongue and I just lost it, but at any rate, but yeah, those are things to do. Just keep posting about it, keep sharing. Oh, if you're big into Facebook and you really are into crowdsourcing things, as you're developing your cover, if you have 3 or 4 different cover ideas, put it on social media and let your audience choose the cover, because that's the best thing. I tell authors all the time, it doesn't matter what you think. Your cover is not about you, it's about your audience. So you could have the most amazing cover that you love, and it's just, wow, I love this, the most amazing cover I've ever created. But if your audience doesn't like it, they're not going to buy your book. So put your covers on social media, let your audience choose the cover for you, and then you can see what's resonating with your people.
Chris, this is David. I love it.
Put it on LinkedIn, Dave.
Yeah,
put it
Dave,
on
we gotta
LinkedIn.
put it
Let
up
the
there.
audience choose.
We're gonna ask you what they think. I'm loving it. I've got to ask a question here. What is looking back in your business here?
Yeah.
What has been some of your favorite stories or favorite projects you've worked on, and why?
Wow, so many. So I wrote my first ghost book was called Mended Faith, and that was amazing. It was a book I co-wrote with a local lady here who was trying to make sense of and get through her sexual abuse. And so she wanted to write a book about it, and how becoming a Christian changed her perspective on sexual abuse and what she went through and why she went through it. Mm-hmm. So we sat down and just went through the whole thing, and that was it made me cut, because I dealt with some abuse as a teen, so it actually helped me to help her write her book. And so I had to deal with a lot of my own pressed down emotions as I helped her with her book. So it ended up being we were kind of co-therapists. So we're talking and going through her book and helping each other out. So that was one of my favorite first projects. Another one that was really fun was a book called Bold I wrote with a John Maxwell coach named Barb Gustafson. And she wrote a good chunk of the book, and that was a co-authoring one where I helped her write, and I helped her write on top of the idea she already had pre-written. And that was a lot of fun, because that was a book about, it was written specifically for women. So I had to really dive into, how do I get in the mind frame of a woman while I'm ghostwriting this book? And so I'm sitting there watching things that women watch, and I'm binging on HGTV, just trying to get in the mind of being, what does an at-home woman do? What does that look like? And so, I think for me, getting a chance to become like the author as much as possible. I think that's the fun part about ghostwriting and co-authoring, is I get a chance to try to get inside the mind of the author and be the author as much as possible. But the fun part about writing that book was you get to see how the other side lives, in a sense, where you see, wow, man, it helps you to appreciate other people, particularly women who have put their careers on hold to raise families. And then they're trying to make sense, well, now that I'm in my early 40s, my kids are leaving the house, how do I even start doing anything again? How do I create a business? How do I go back to work? And so that's what that book was about, is just giving yourself permission before you get to 40, while you're in your 20s, while your kids at home, give yourself permission to build a business. It's okay to build a business and raise a family. So that was a fun one.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This is Danny, by the way. As you were just talking, Chris, it kind of reminded me when I think about listening to what I call the actors when they read scripts. Mm-hmm. And actors like to envision and portray and visualize as if they're living that particular script out before they even act it out. Do you at times, because you help so many people write their books, and as you said, you're learning about the women items and watching women's shows to really get into it. Do you ever at times when you're helping people write their books, you ever get lost because you're just like, man, I just got drawn in so much that it is hard for me to get back out because I'm so into this book, or I'm so into this individual I'm helping to write their book, that it's hard for me to get back out. And you say, yes, I want this script. Right? You ever get lost in that process?
I've never gotten like totally lost in the process, but I've been immersed. Like while I was in it, I was completely immersed. Like coming out wasn't always hard, but like when I was ghostwriting the abuse book, I asked her, like, I was like, she talked about her dad and like the music he used to listen to. I was like, well, send me all the music he used to listen to, even though I don't speak a lick of German, I'll listen to it. Because she's a native German speaker, so she sent me like a list of all the songs her dad listened to, and so her dad would smoke cigars, and so I would go sit down and write at the cigar shop so I could smell the cigar. So I try, like you said, like it's like being an actor. I try to get into character as much as possible when I'm ghostwriting, so I can feel the same things that the author felt, or sense the same things that the author sensed.
That's fantastic. I want to let the audience know. Listen, this is Danny, by the way. If you have a great idea, and I'm going to tell you, everyone has a great idea. Don't ever say you don't have a great idea. And don't ever think your story is not a story that people would like to listen to, because there's only one of you. There's never going to be one just like you. Even though David and I are identical twins, we talk alike, we sound alike, we look alike. We are really a little bit different. And we actually have a book called Identically Opposite. So never think that you don't have a story that can relate to anybody. If you're ever in a position where you want to get your story out because you want to impact one person, maybe two, maybe three, maybe 1,000, reach out to Chris, because he will help you frame a process, put a process in place, and actually coach you along the way to becoming an author. Chris, we want to thank you so very much for joining David and myself on the Twins Talk It Up podcast. We're so honored to have you on board. We're so honored to have you help our audience know that, yes, it is not that difficult. They can get their story out. They can make an impact, and you actually enjoy helping them to be able to get their story out. Thank you so very much, Chris, for joining us on the Twins Talk It Up podcast today.
Oh, no, you're welcome. If I could say one last thing, one parting shot, you can do it. You can write. I think people get caught up in, well, I don't have time, or, well, it takes time to write. I tell people all the time, and I wrote it in my book, is that write anywhere. I used to write when I was working on my first book, I had my phone, I would write in the grocery store. I would deliberately find the longest checkout line and stand in that line and work on my book while I was in checkout lines. Or when we go to like the amusement park, I would go and wait in the longest roller coaster line and I would just work on my book. So you can do it. If you got a smartphone, you can peck in a few words. You can also dictate it in. You can talk a lot faster than you write. Just start dictating. Google Docs is perfect for that if you use Google Docs. But yeah, you can get it done. Just little small baby steps.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're Chris, welcome. Thank you again. We look forward to seeing our relationship and partnership continue to grow. And for everybody else out there, thank you for being a supporter of the Twins Talking Up podcast. And we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everyone. All right.